Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome back to another episode of Love and Abuse, and if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome to Love and Abuse. Just to let you know, all information on love and abuse is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. For those who don't know, I say that because there are some suggestions that I'll make that may ask you to talk to someone or do behavior that might upset someone else. And if that person gets so upset that they become aggressive or violent, I don't want to put you in that situation. I don't want you to be in that situation, and I hope you're not in that kind of environment. But if you are, pick your battles wisely. So that's why I say it for anyone that is listening to this show for the first time. And for those who have listened and have heard this show before, you probably know what to expect. I talk about emotional abuse and control and manipulation and other behaviors that many people do in relationships that make them difficult. And that's what I say about the Mean Workbook over at loveandabuse.com. That is the healing and assessment guide for difficult relationships. And relationships, they're not supposed to be so difficult that you don't want to face the other person every day. They shouldn't be like that. You should not be in a relationship where you don't want to face the other person. I think one of the main points of being in at least a romantic relationship is that you have someone that you enjoy being around, that you enjoy talking to, that you enjoy sharing with and spending time with and having experiences together with, and not the opposite. If you're in a relationship where it's the opposite, then you have to look at why, and you have to figure out if that's the relationship you want to keep, or if it's a relationship that you want to work on. Because it's not always about leaving something that isn't working out. Sometimes you find ways to work things out. But it's a two-way street. You both have to work on things. You both have to heal. You both have to move forward. And if only one person is moving forward and the other one says, you do all the moving forward, you do all the work on yourself because you're the problem, then you're not in an equal partnership. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not in a relationship. A relationship involves us. It involves we. We do things together. We grow together. We heal together. We learn together. And we take responsibility together. So even if the other person is more of a problem or is the main problem, you should both work on it. If you want to work on the relationship. Some people don't. And some people think that the other person has to work on the relationship. This works both ways. Sometimes you have the victim of emotional abuse saying that the other person needs to change because I'm doing everything I can. I'm here to say quite often that's true. The emotionally abusive person does need to change. But the victim of emotional abuse or control or manipulation also needs to realize that there are behaviors that you may be doing that may enable those behaviors. Not saying that it's your fault that it happens. It's just good to know what behaviors that you might do that might cause them to be emotionally triggered to do behaviors towards you. Again, let me explain that. It's not your fault. It's your responsibility to understand how you show up in the relationship. And let me give you a good example of this. You take someone in a relationship that might be being emotionally abused, and let's just say that what they're doing is every time their partner gives them the silent treatment and withdraws love and affection and attention, which can be a form of emotional abuse when you withdraw love, especially to make the other person feel bad or feel guilty in order to make them conform or change. So the abuser will do something like the silent treatment, and the person that is receiving the silent treatment, they ask questions. They ask, where are you? And, I wish you would come back to me, or I wish you would share with me. And what the abuser is doing is receiving exactly what they want. And what I mean by that is when the victim of the silent treatment, in this example, pleads with the person doing the silent treatment to come back to them and share with them what the perpetrator of the silent treatment is doing, is putting the victim in a more vulnerable space, a kinder space to them. They think that asking them where they are, and when the person that's receiving the silent treatment is pleading with the other person to come back to them, to share with them what's going on, the perpetrator of the silent treatment is getting exactly what they want. They want you to be in a space of almost despair. They want you to be confused. They want you to feel sad. I mean, in the context of emotional abuse, the silent treatment, when it's used to make the other person feel sad or bad in some way, feeling like they're unloved, the victim of the silent treatment is going to want more love and give more love, typically, to the person doing the silent treatment, which is the result they wanted. So it puts the victim of the silent treatment in a very vulnerable space and typically causes them to give more attention to the person doing the silent treatment, which is the secondary gain for the silent treatment in the first place. So not only does the silent treatment make the victim feel bad, but it causes the victim to give more time and attention and love to the person doing it, giving them what they want. It's a strange concept for those who don't do this or aren't familiar with it, but it is an important concept to learn, because if the victim is acting this way when they're getting the silent treatment, then the victim will likely get the silent treatment again and again, because the person who's doing the silent treatment is getting the results they want. So this is why I say it's important to understand, as the victim of any type of emotionally abusive behavior, that you understand how your behavior could facilitate more bad behavior from them. And so in order to avoid this, you ask yourself the question, what do they gain from this behavior? So if somebody's doing any behavior, let's just take the silent treatment again. If someone's doing the silent treatment, what do they gain from that behavior? You may say nothing, they're just angry or they're doing something else, but let's just pretend that they're gaining something, even if they don't know they're gaining it. What are they gaining from that behavior? Ask yourself, what are they gaining from that behavior? And put yourself in their shoes. Pretend you are them and ask yourself, how am I benefiting? And also ask yourself the question, how do I typically respond when they do that behavior? Or even if it's any behavior, if they're not doing the silent treatment, maybe they say things to you, maybe they do other things. No matter what it is, how do I normally respond when they do that? Because if you can figure out how you normally respond and don't do that anymore, what you do is take away the incentive for them doing that. Because they won't do bad behavior that doesn't give them a gain of some sort. So if you can figure out the gain, like eventually you comply with whatever they want, that could be a big gain for them. And if that's the case, that's why they do it. Then you need to figure out what they gain and change your behavior in a way that doesn't give them that advantage or benefit. And when you do that, you're taking away what reinforces their behavior. So again, just to make this clear, this is not your fault, but if you know the specific behaviors that gives them some sort of benefit or gain, and you take that away from them, that could essentially change their behavior. And of course, at the same time, it may not. This is all experimental. In your relationship, it may be very unique why they do what they do, or what they do. It's very specific to certain things that they gain from it. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they are experiencing depression. Maybe they are just an angry person. It could have nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. But this is why I suggest these things, to try and see what happens. And maybe you'll realize something new that helps you understand what's going on more and helps you understand why they're doing the behavior in the first place. And let me just clarify that the silent treatment in emotional abuse is a way to make the other person feel bad, withdrawing love, withdrawing affection, so that the other person does behavior that the person doing the silent treatment wants. That is different than being silent and being alone so that you can process things. That's a totally different type of silent treatment. I wouldn't even call it silent treatment. I just call that you need time to yourself. That's different. The silent treatment is typically an emotionally abusive behavior, whereas you need time to yourself is something that isn't about the other person at all. It might be about the person, but you're not being silent and keeping to yourself because you want the other person to change or feel bad or anything like that. You're just reflecting and processing and trying to figure things out. And sometimes they can cross. I get that too. Sometimes you want the other person to feel bad, but for the most part, if you're reflecting and just processing and it isn't your intention to make the other person feel bad or withdraw love from them, and you just need to figure things out, then that silence is more along the lines of, I just need time to think. So anyway, I don't want to expand too much into that because I'm going to share with you an interview that I did on a show called Cultivate Your Inner Goddess. And this is on the website Coaching by Grace, and the person that's interviewing me, her name is Grace. And we talked very specifically about emotionally abusive relationships, romantic relationships, and I think it might be helpful to you. So I wanted to share it with you. If you have any interest in listening to Grace's podcast, again, you can go over to coachingbygrace.com and check her out there. But I'm going to let this interview roll, and I hope you get a lot from it. And I will chime in at the very end, and we'll end the show, and I'll say my goodbyes then. I'll talk to you after the conversation.
Before we get started, I just wanted to let people know that you are actually my coach. Coaches sometimes need coaches of their own because it's challenging to see our own problems. So I just wanted to kind of welcome you and just let the audience know that even coaches need coaches. I
totally agree. I mean, if we're not working on our own stuff all the time, then how do we continue to pass that along to others? So I agree with everything you just said.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So my first question for you is, what are signs of emotional abuse?
Obviously, this is not a very fun topic to talk about, emotional abuse. You hear the word abuse and you think of pretty severe behavior. Often people think of the physical aspect of abuse. Emotional abuse, I've studied for a long time, and in fact, full transparency, when I was married and many relationships before that, I have been known to be emotionally abusive, and a lot of people do it without even knowing they're doing it. And for a long time, that's exactly where I was, having a dysfunctional upbringing, learning coping mechanisms, learning survival mechanisms, and turning that behavior onto friends and family, and especially romantic partners. So your question regarding the signs, there's probably thousands of signs of emotional abuse. So the way I like to look at it is that when you're in a relationship of any sort, when you feel bad after interactions with your partner, and especially you feel bad about yourself, as if it's almost your partner's goal to make you feel bad or make you feel bad about yourself, then you might be thinking about seeing or looking at the possibility of emotional abuse in the relationship. A few signs that I could recall right off the bat here is when your partner makes you feel guilty. So you're having a conversation or even an argument, and they start bringing things up that make you feel guilty, and after the conversation is done, you keep going with this guilt feeling lingering inside of you, and it's hard to get rid of because they've said some pretty hurtful things, and they've used your compassion against you, and they've used your generosity against you by saying, things that would hurt your feelings. So emotional abuse, again, in the way I define it, is when you feel bad about yourself, especially after any interaction in a romantic relationship. Another sign could be when your partner puts you down, insults you, makes you feel bad again, hurts you in any way, and there's no sense of empathy or apology. Like during it, it might happen after, but there's no apology during it, like, wow, I just made her or him feel bad. Then you're looking at emotionally abusive behavior typically. But There's a lot of signs and symptoms. In fact, I may bring it up while we're talking and just read you some more, but that in a nutshell is when you feel bad or when you feel bad about yourself is how I see emotional abuse as being defined in a relationship.
And do you feel that it's easy to recognize these signs when you're actually in a relationship?
It's not easy to recognize. In fact, you don't even know it's happening sometimes because there's a slow trickle drip feed effect of abuse that occurs. And what I mean by that is somebody could hurt your feelings in the relationship, and you might think it's just a normal relationship thing. Everyone goes through it. And quite often, most people go through somebody hurting their feelings in a relationship. But what I look for in emotional abuse is the pattern that develops over the weeks and sometimes years of a relationship with repeated behaviors that cause you to feel bad. And I've often seen, and this is another sign of emotional abuse, I've often seen that one partner believes they're right about everything, and the other partner, they blame everything on. The other partner is responsible for fixing the relationship. The other partner is responsible for fixing themselves. And the partner that's saying all this stuff, they think they can do no wrong. They think they're right. They think their partner needs to go through therapy, and all of this may or may not be true, but when you're in a relationship, you should have an equal partnership and you should both be working on it. It should be more of a we thing instead of a you thing. You need to fix this. You need to take care of this. So how about we need to go through this? We need to take care of this. And you start to work together, working on the relationship, creating a better foundation for the relationship. So it's helpful to know that in a moment, you may not recognize it as emotional abuse, but the repetitive behavior of that same thing happening over and over again, where you feel bad after every time they do a certain thing or say a certain thing, is that pattern you want to look for. So in the moment, somebody might look at something happening and say, I don't see that as being emotionally abusive. I don't see that as being hurtful. But if that happens over and over again, once a day, once a week, you will start to feel the effects slowly. I like to call it relationship radiation. You're exposed to it day after day after day, and you feel the burn day after day after day. But if you were to go to your friend or family or someone you trust and say, hey, look, so-and-so said this and hurt my feelings, they might say, well, my boyfriend or girlfriend said that too, and it was a moment in time, but it passed and we got through it. But if that happens over and over again, that's when you start looking for the patterns, or you start to recognize there might be emotional abuse because of the pattern that's starting to lay out in your past. And I like to look at it this way. Relationships have like a trend line. And if you've ever been in a boardroom where they draw this line on a whiteboard and it's going up and to the right, you're looking at it going, hey, look, we're making a profit and more profits every day. So as the trend line rises up and to the right, we're gaining more profits and we're making more money. This is great. But if it's going straight across, then we're at a steady pace. But if it's going down and to the right, hey, we're losing money and we're in a big problem here. I like to look at relationships the same way. Look at the past year or 5 years or 10 years of your relationship. What has the trend line done? At minimum, hopefully, it's been steady with some ups and downs. But if it's been slowly declining, and this is really gauging your level of happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment in the relationship, if it's been on a slow decline to the right, then you have something. That's your pattern. That's what you can look at and go, oh, something is happening here. I'm more unhappy over the days and weeks, months and years, and I need to look at that. Because what happens is we get stuck in the day. We get stuck in the present moment of what's happening today. Oh, he or she hurt my feelings. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. Let's go to the next day. Oh, he or she hurt my feelings again. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. Let's go to the next day. And you can start to see if that is creating the pattern that you need to look at. That's how I tell people to look at that trend line and what has been happening. Because what has been happening, what will happen in the future, almost always, unless something is done.
So, in your opinion, how do you know when it's time to leave? How do you know when the relationship is so bad that you might need to get out of it? Because sometimes in relationships, you might be living together your finances might be commingled. Like, what is, in your opinion, is a good gauge for you when you're being emotionally abused or in a unhealthy relationship to say, okay, all right, it's time for me to stop. I need to leave.
Yeah, and I think that's the magic answer that everyone wants to know. When is the right time to leave if I'm experiencing emotional abuse or hurtful behavior of any sort? I like to look at it this way. When you're in a relationship, if you're not more than 50% happy most of the time, you're probably not going to be happy ever in the relationship. If you're more than 50% happy most of the time, then you're probably okay. You probably have to deal with some challenges here and there, but maybe you can work through them. I mean, that's going to be up to you, of course. But if you're less than 50% happy most of the time, and it's been like that for a while, and you've talked to your partner, and you've tried to work things out, and you've tried to come to an agreement, and you've tried to tell them that we need to fix something, and you've tried, and either they're not on board or they're putting it all on you, and you still haven't gotten anywhere, and you're still less than 50% happy. Here's the thing. I don't necessarily push for leaving anyone that's emotionally abusive right away. I actually think people should be given an opportunity to change, and that opportunity, it can come in many forms, but I like to use accountability as an opportunity for them to change, meaning somebody's being hurtful or trying to guilt you, or silent treatment. There's an example of emotional abuse when somebody withholds love and withholds attention from you. It feels like you don't know where they are, you don't know what they think, you don't know what they feel, you just feel like you're neglected. So what ends up happening is you're in this one-sided, or you feel like you're the only person in a relationship. When is it time to leave? You talk to your partner. Look, when you give me the silent treatment, I feel like you're not there at all, and I can't share with you what's going on with me. You're just not there. So I need someone, I need you to talk to me. I need you to, come back to me and share what's on your mind. Now, sometimes we go through the silent treatment because we need to process things and figure things out. And that's fine. A lot of us do that. And then we come back and we talk about it. But if they never come back and they never talk about it, or it's been days and they're just neglecting or just being away from you, then it's time to say, look, if you don't stop doing this, this is what I would say, I can't be in a relationship with somebody who does this. I can't be in a relationship with someone who makes me feel guilty all the time. I can't be in a relationship where somebody actually doesn't care if I'm crying, and I'm crying because of something you said. And so when you start saying something like this, it gives them an opportunity to empathize and really understand how they're hurting you or affecting the relationship in general. And this is where, if you're being emotionally abused and you start saying things like, I can't be in a relationship with somebody like this, let's work on this, let's fix this, let's do something about it, or let's talk about this, and hopefully they will talk about it, that communication is going to be the key to opening up what's going on, because somebody who loves you and supports you wants you to be happy. That's my definition of love, is supporting someone's happiness or supporting someone's path to happiness. So when you are supporting someone's path to happiness and they're supporting your path to happiness, then it all works out, because you're going to do things to accommodate. Maybe you'll make some compromises and you'll build this thing together. But if they are not caring about your happiness and they don't care if you're hurt, and especially if they hurt you, or if they're not taking responsibility for their own behaviors, or they're not being a part of the relationship, then we have to look at the next step, which you were saying, when is it time to leave? At what point? What's the magic point? My big thing there is when you say, look, I can't be in a relationship with somebody that does this, let's talk about it. Or even being more direct and saying, when you do this, it makes me feel bad. This gives them an opportunity to answer, to reply and say, oh, I don't, and hopefully they say this, hopefully they'll say, I don't mean to make you feel bad. I'm sorry about that. What can I do instead? Or how can we work this out? Because maybe they're mad too. It's quite likely they're mad too, or they're upset about something, but they're taking it out on you in ways that are unhealthy. So we find out if they're going to make changes just like you are, because most times The victim of emotional abuse makes tons and tons of changes. They're always trying to accommodate. They're always trying to please. They're always trying to try harder to please their partner because maybe they take responsibility. They think, maybe it's my fault. Maybe I'm showing up in a way that is not helpful to this or hurtful. So I will make a change and I will make a change. But if you never see those changes on the other side, then it's time to consider, well, they're not making changes. And you look at that trend line. Have they not made changes for the past few months, few years? If they say they're going to do it and they don't do it, you have to assume that they're not going to do it. And at that point, you make a decision to go, you know what? I have tried. I've done everything I can, and nothing has changed. They said they will change, or maybe they didn't, but typically what happens, they'll say they'll change, and then they don't. And then you just have to believe that's how it's going to be from this point on. I look at it this way. If you are in a relationship and you say, look, if something doesn't change in, give a time period, if this behavior doesn't change in 4 weeks, I'm going to make different plans. I'm going to start thinking that I need to find a different place to live. This is big steps for some people because they're committed. They have kids and sometimes, and there's a lot of commitments involved. But accountability, coming back to that, is the key to helping someone understand that if they don't change, then things will change. You have to stay with your mother for a while, or, you have to separate for a while. Separation and divorce doesn't mean it's the end, but you just say these things, and then when you say them, saying, if these changes don't happen, I have to do the next right thing for me, and you do that thing. You make the accountability count. You make it happen. But it's a challenge and a lot deeper to get into, sometime. But that is my key, is you bring up the problems and then talk about the problems. And if the problems don't change, then you just have to accept that they won't. And from that point on, you can make a decision. I know I'm simplifying a lot of this, and it's a lot bigger steps than we're talking about, but that is the basics.
Yeah, relationships can be quite complicated. I guess that's a good word.
Yes.
So let's say if you've been working on the relationship for a while and it just doesn't feel like it's going anywhere, do you believe that people fear being single? Like, do you see that as a barrier for people? They'd rather be in this relationship that's unhealthy than being single. Do you see that as an issue by any chance? Or what's your take on fear of being single?
Oh, yeah. I think you're right on there, as a lot of people stay in hurtful and harmful relationships because they feel better at least being in a relationship than not. And I look at that as you have a fear of abandonment, you have a fear of rejection, you grew up feeling neglected by your parents or some caretaker. So you look for those qualities in a partner, and when you get them, you feel like this is the best you can get. And if you don't have this partner, that you're never going to get that partner again. So there's all kinds of what I would call unhealthy beliefs in there. Like, if I break up with this person, I'll never have somebody to love me again, or this person showed me love that no one else has ever shown me. But that's not true. They may have done that in the beginning, but what ends up happening, especially in emotionally abusive relationships, is that the emotionally abusive person will show up as the best partner ever in the first month or 2 or 3 or 4, and then suddenly they start showing their true colors, and you start feeling bad, and you start thinking that maybe you're doing something wrong, maybe you need to do something better, like I was just saying. And so you end up trying to accommodate and trying to please, trying to get that person back, and they never come back because what was happening is their true selves were coming out. The person they showed you up front isn't the person they really are long term. So what you're saying is that some victims of emotional abuse might have a fear of being single or a fear of abandonment, and that actually might be a self-devaluing process. Like, I don't value myself enough to get out of a relationship where somebody hurts me. And I'm not trying to put the fault or the blame on the victim of the emotional abuse, but I just want anyone that's in a relationship to consider that you may have some sort of self-worth or self-esteem issue in there for you to continue to expose yourself to any type of hurtful behavior. So when you're aware of it, you have to ask yourself, am I exposing myself to this because I'm afraid to be alone? And if that's the case, ask yourself the next question, which is a very important question. If my partner's behavior never, ever changes, will I be okay with it? Will I be okay in a year if this never changes, in 5 years, in 10 years? And if your answer is, well, no, I want him or her to change, and I told you no, it will never happen, ever, what is your decision then? Because that is the question that needs to go through your head, because, again, looking at the trend line, has it changed in the past 5 years? If the answer is no, then the next 5 years are going to be the exact same way, if not worse. It really does come down to accepting what's happening and what will happen in order for you to come to a decision in yourself that you need to make for you, for the best of all, really. I mean, if you end up leaving a relationship, if that is your decision, that actually helps both of you. It takes the victim of the abuse out of the situation, and it takes the stimuli for the abuser out of the situation, giving them both a chance to reflect on what they've been exposing themselves to. The victim more than the abuser, but the abuser has an opportunity to look at his or her behavior and start to figure out, gee, maybe I caused this in some way, shape, or form. So that can be helpful. But coming back to your question, I do think that many people stay in relationships because of their fear of being single, because of their fear of being lonely. I don't want to be lonely. I would rather have somebody, anybody, even if they're hurtful, because sometimes the good part comes out. This is where, if somebody was sitting in front of me and they asked this question, should I stay in a relationship because I have a fear of loneliness, or is it better to be lonely and sad and not without someone? I just asked the question, well, can you accept this behavior if it never changes? I mean, that is the answer. And if you can come up with that answer, can you accept this behavior in your relationship if it never ever changes? And you say, well, I guess I can, then there's your answer. It may not be pleasant, but if you want to take the bad with the good, if you can find the good, if there is good in there, because why would you stay if there's no good? That's another question. Is there any good in this relationship? Well, yeah, this is good and that's good. Okay. Can you accept if this behavior never changes? Typically, the response that I'll get is, yeah, but he or she's working on it. And they say they're going to change and they're working on it. And that's okay too. If they're working on it, great. But what's the trend? What has been happening? Has their work improved the trend line? Has it started moving up and to the right? Because if not, now you have a situation that you have to accept will never change. I mean, this is it. So I'm throwing that in there very direct, very blunt, that you have to accept what has been happening, what is happening, and know without a doubt that it will continue happening. I may be 100% wrong. Maybe tomorrow they have a revelation and they change and they're suddenly a great person. But you can't rely on what's not there yet. You can only rely on what's been happening and what is happening now. So that's where I like to put people, in that space. And if you can come up, well, you should be able to come up with an answer, is if you can accept this as never changing, then you'll know what to do from that point on. And yes, you might have to be alone after that. But it might also be the best thing, what it usually is. If things have been going bad, it's usually better to be alone, to reflect and clear some of the toxicity out of your life so that you can start thinking more clearly. Because when you're with a toxic person, you can't think very clearly. A couple months go by and you start thinking clearly. That will help you get on a better road for yourself. Because you never know what's going to happen. But if you stay in that situation, you know exactly what's going to happen.
Speaking of thinking clearly, sometimes people get into relationships and they feel like it's a good relationship at the time. However, they get feedback from friends and family members that this person is no good for them, but the person at the time feels like they're in a good relationship. So kind of, how do you know when you're in this possibly not healthy relationship if you're able to see clearly and see the signs?
Meaning if you're in a relationship.
So if I feel like I'm in a healthy relationship and that I'm happy with this partner and my friends don't like him and my family don't like him and they voice these opinions to me that he's no good for me. Yeah, like how can I, like as the person in the relationship, kind of filter out what I believe versus what other people might be telling me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Remember when you were a teenager and you got into a relationship and mom or dad or somebody said, I don't like her, or I don't like him. I mean, maybe it didn't happen to you, or maybe it did, but anyone listening, I think a lot of us have been there. Like, you don't know my girlfriend. You don't know her as well as I do. You don't know what you're saying. And I've had friends come up to me and say, she's no good for you. And I'm like, what are you saying? She's no good. You don't even know who this person is. I'm the one dating them. So I think that applies a lot with situations like this. Like, why are you dating that guy? That guy's a real jerk. Oh, he's so sweet. He does this and he does this. And yeah, we have friends that do that. And sometimes it's us that does that. I look at it this way. This is where you measure your own happiness. There are going to be people that look at the person you're dating and they're not going to like him at all. And sometimes that's a good thing because that shows there's an incompatibility there and they'll never be together, which is good. We don't need any threats out there. Not that it may ever be introduced, but not everyone is compatible with one another. So we have to look at that. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes our parents, our friends, our family, they see the person we're dating, and sometimes they're right about that person, but we're so blinded with love, or maybe we have more unconditional feelings, and we can see through all their faults, and we can see through all the mistakes they've made, or maybe sometimes they're a jerk, or maybe sometimes they're yelling, but when we go home, they're kind-hearted. Who knows? A lot of people are going to see a different person than the one person that we're with. I look at it as, let's take my example. With my girlfriend, if people started coming up to me and said, oh, she's so mean to you all the time when you're out and about. I go, yeah, she might yell at me once in a while. I mean, this doesn't happen. I'm just making stuff up. She might yell at me once in a while. When we come home, she's very kind to me. She takes care of me. She talks to me nicely. I mean, there's a lot involved that might be okay that makes the entire relationship nice and kind and respectful. So I would look at that as, hey, I'm happy in this relationship. She makes me happy, even though other people see a different side of her. Now, in the context of emotional abuse, we turn this around because other people see that person's behavior and they see what's going on, and they can see that maybe you're unhappy, or you're trying harder and harder, or you're always feeling guilty, you're always defending the person, and you just can't convince anyone, but you think what you have is great. That typically comes from the first few months of the relationship because you got to know the person in that time, and then you stuck with that's who they really are. So the victim of emotional abuse might have this in their head that the person that I met the first few months of the relationship is really who they are, when it's the opposite, typically. Typically the opposite is like the person they showed up as was the one they lured you with. They brought you into, under their wing or in the circle of influence there. And now they are different, but you might still see them as that person who they were. You might actually have, and this is what happens a lot of sympathetic people, a lot of supportive people, a lot of generous people, a lot of people pleaser type of people, and a lot of people that just unconditionally love no matter what, get into relationships with hurtful people. And when that happens, they tend to give more benefit of the doubt to these people. They tend to let them get away with more, especially when the abuser is playing the victim. I had a rough childhood. I was abused as a child. I was hurt. I was yelled at. I was screamed at. I was hit, which all could be true and all deserve our compassion, but definitely not an excuse to be mistreating anyone today. But the partner of the abuser who's been a victim, him or herself, will have so much compassion for that abuser's past that they see through all the bad behavior. So, in answer to your question, if all your friends and family are saying this, I think it's smart to open your eyes and open your ears and take a step out of the loving feelings that you have, just to be observant, not to find fault, but just to figure out if there is something that maybe you're hiding from yourself, because a lot of people will go into denial. They'll be in a relationship and they'll deny what's going on because they don't want to lose the relationship, or it's They don't know my partner's story. He or she is a real victim here. But you step out of the relationship and look at it objectively from a third person point of view, just to make sure that maybe you're not missing anything. And I think you should do that in healthy relationships too. This isn't just because they're emotionally abusive. I still think there needs to be a very inactive to a point, passive observer of your relationships for both people. I mean, just like something you said at the beginning, you kind of need coaching. You kind of need people to be that healthy observer that can be outside the environment and see it from a zoomed out perspective. And if you can do that yourself during the relationship, you'll start to catch things early on, first of all, and you won't be so stuck in your own emotions during that time. Everyone deserves compassion. Everyone deserves to be loved and supported in the way they can, but it is important to step out of that for a moment. Not that you're not being compassionate, but you step out of that and look at that zoom out perspective to see what's happening at a bigger picture. And this comes back to the 50% rule. Am I more happy 50% of the time or not? Am I less happy 50% of the time? If you're more happy 50% of the time, then maybe what people are saying could be true, but it doesn't affect the relationship because your personality kind of fits their personality. It all works out. But I know it's a long answer to a short question, but it is an important question because you're going to have this happen with certain people in your life. And I think once you start identifying emotionally abusive behavior in your relationship, then you can start looking at this a little closer and start maybe putting your friends and family's comments ahead of the line and queue and figure out maybe if what they're saying might have some truth to it. But it can be difficult for some people to step out of that when they've been so embroiled or enmeshed with somebody for a long time. I'm not sure if that answers the full question, but that's my take on it.
Yes, that was very helpful. You had mentioned even if you're in a healthy relationship, you can take that step back, that bird's eye view. In your opinion, what are the components of a healthy relationship?
Yeah, that's another good question. We'll start off with the 50% rule. More happy than not. Look at the trend line. That's good too. But there's other practical stuff too. I like to look at a healthy relationship as when something upsets you, you're actually able to talk about it with the other person without it becoming amplified and worse for the most part and most of the time. There are some things that are going to make it worse, like, can't believe you did this, it hurt my feelings. What? You hurt my feelings too. And then it can grow from there. But to be able to have actually healthy arguments in the sense where you're open to your partner about what's going on, like, hey, when you said that, it made me feel disrespected. I think having the I feel statements in any type of conversation, instead of you did this to me, it's your fault kind of statements, is a very healthy way to connect. It also strengthens the bond if you can be really honest, almost to the point, and this is kind of a philosophy I use, be honest to a point where you're actually risking the relationship. And what that means is you say things that are so truthful that it could actually make them upset. I mean, not like you're trying to hurt their feelings, but you say, I don't want somebody in my life that talks to me like that. I like to look at a relationship where you say something like that, where, hey, what you just said really hurt me. I don't want to be in a relationship where somebody hurts me like that. That could risk the relationship. Because what you're saying is, I'm ready to leave a relationship with somebody who treats me like that. That's a very risky thing to say. It feels like you're taking a chance. But I've learned over the years that taking these chances of being this honest with people actually grows and amplifies the bond between you. It really strengthens it because what you're doing is you're not holding anything back. One of the biggest issues I found in relationships are people that hold back, that don't want to say everything, that don't want to share what's going on inside of them. And when they do that, it ends up causing the other person to interpret what's going on. And when they interpret what's going on, it doesn't always work out well. And then there's so little communication. Of course, we all know communication is the key, but there's so little communication between each other. They don't share enough of what's going on inside of them that there's just all this interpretation. And it's always misinterpreted. I mean, you did that, which means you must think low of me. You did that, which means you probably don't value me. You did that, which means you probably don't love me. These are all thoughts that can go on in your head. But if they're having these thoughts and you're not saying, hey, look, I did that because I was upset that you didn't do what you're going to say, then that truth comes out. It might turn into an argument. But these truths that have to come out in order for you to feel safe enough around someone to be honest enough with you, even if it hurts their feelings. And I don't mean pointing at someone and saying, you're a bitch, you're a jerk. That can happen in arguments, but it shouldn't be all about hurting the other person. It should be all about conveying what's going on at the deepest level inside of you so that you're not causing any misinterpretation or misunderstanding. And you might say things that they know aren't true, but it is true for you. That's another part of healthy relationship, is that sometimes they're going to say, well, no, I didn't mean that. Then you can say, well, when you said it, this is what it meant to me. This is what I felt. And hopefully, if you're in a healthy relationship, they go, oh, well, I didn't mean for it to come out that way. I'm so sorry. I never want you to feel bad. I never want you to hurt. And, another component, which I've already talked about, of a healthy relationship is wanting your partner to be happy and supporting that happiness in them. If they like to listen to country music and you like to listen to rap, and every time they play country music, you get mad, and every time the other person plays rap, they get mad, that's not really supporting each other. That's just saying, I don't like to hear that stuff. Don't play that. How about, hey, you can play that anytime you want. Just wear your headphones, please, because I don't want to hear it. Or you can play that anytime you want, in your car, or we can alternate what we listen to. It's a minor example. It could be a major annoyance in some relationships. But what you're doing is saying, I don't want to change who you are. And I think that's probably the most vital point of a healthy relationship, is when you get into one, you really don't want to change the person and who they are and their goals and their aspirations. Again, you might have to make little compromises here and there. I want a house. I want an apartment. Oh, can we compromise there? I want to live in the city. I want to live in the country. Where can we live instead? There's things like that you just have to agree upon. Hopefully you can come to an agreement. But for the most part, I want to support what you want for you, because the more happy you are, the happier you'll show up in the relationship, the more you'll continue to work on and improve yourself the way you want to do it, and the more you'll feel supported doing that, pursuing your dreams, pursuing your passions, pursuing your happiness, and that makes you happier in the relationship. So they both end up bringing the best version of themselves into the relationship. And I think that's where the magic can really happen, is when you're not trying to control or change or manipulate the other person. You're actually supporting them on their path, and they feel so supported that they want to be with you. They want to be near you. Everyone wants to be around people that support them. I think that's universal. I don't think anyone has a problem with that. Oh, you support me? You don't care if I go on this fishing expedition when I have no money and I don't know if I'm going to be able to eat while I'm out there? I'm just going to go. If that's what you want to do, I mean, I'm scared as hell for you. I don't want you to do it. But if that's what you want to do, I want you to be happy. I think that's a powerful thing for relationships. So I've just packed a bunch of answers into that one answer. I hope that made sense.
Those are very good answers. And we're kind of winding down here the interview, but so one of the themes that I talk about on my podcast is really about empowering and being the best version of yourself.
Yes.
Do you have any tips on how everyone can live each day feeling empowered and good about themselves? And do you have any tips for self-empowerment, or what we can do to really be strong in our relationships and ourselves?
Yes, I do. I have many of those too. And I think what I've learned over the years, let's put it this way. Honoring yourself is probably the fastest path to empowerment. And what I mean by that is there are things that you value in life. There are behaviors that you'll accept and you won't accept from other people. And when you choose to honor your own personal boundaries and follow the path of those boundaries and what you value most, you typically end up with the best life you can end up with. And this is tough, too, for a lot of people. A good example is your boss is yelling at you, and you don't want them to yell at you. Let's just say that they come out and they're yelling at you in front of other people. So it feels a little humiliating. You're feeling shamed. It's embarrassing, and you have integrity. You feel like you shouldn't be yelled at. This is a personal boundary. You should be respected, at minimum, in front of other people by an authority figure who's putting you down. So inside you have these values. Inside you have these boundaries. But how many of us will look at our boss and say, if you have a problem, let's talk in your office, because what you're doing now is unacceptable. I mean, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to do that because they realize if I say that, I'm going to lose my job. Or they're going to yell at me and I don't want to be yelled at even more. It's going to be hard, but I have practiced this. I have walked my talk when it comes to honoring personal boundaries and staying in alignment with what I value and keeping my integrity and honoring that integrity. When somebody tries to break through those values and those boundaries, I do my best to make it clear what behavior is unacceptable and what is acceptable. So in the example with the boss, I would say, let's go talk in your office. I can't accept you coming out here and yelling at me. And I might even say, no, I'm taking a risk by telling you this. You could fire me on the spot. And if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. But I have integrity, and I think it's unfair, and I think it's rude that you do this, because this person is another human being. Regardless if they're my boss, if they're paying me, I really have to stand up for who I am at the deepest level. I really have to stand up for that person. And every time I haven't done it, I've held on to regret, resentment, anger, upset, and I've become depressed. And every time I've not honored myself, I've held something in. I've let it linger. I've let it fester inside of me. So all this negativity festering inside of me. But one day I started taking a chance. I started taking risks. And these are personal, emotional risks that I've taken in order to understand what happens when I do honor myself. And I've learned so much by, for example, my boss. I've actually had to have conversations with my boss that I believed would get me fired. I knew they would. And instead of getting me fired, they got me promoted. Things like that have happened. And I thought, what is going on? Everything I've believed all my life, always make nice, always be kind, always try to, not make waves, isn't always true. It shouldn't be true if you're being disrespected. I mean, that's what I say on my podcast, Love and Abuse. You deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. And I've made that my philosophy. So if somebody mistreats me and treats me unkindly, I'm either going to walk away or say something about it. But I'm not going to stand there and take it. There might be exceptions. If I'm in a bank and it's getting robbed and there's a gun in my face, I might let them be unkind and disrespectful because there's a greater good going on here. I want to live. But for the most part, there's a lot of scenarios that unfold before our eyes in our lives that put us in a situation that allow us to honor ourselves. And there's no fear of death involved, even though it feels like that sometimes. Sometimes we fear like if we do something, we're going to have these consequences come at us and they're going to be bad. But that's all made up stuff. We make up this stuff. We imagine something bad's going to happen. And so I came up with a question for myself, and this is, I think, very helpful for anyone, is if I were to do or say anything, regardless of the consequences, what would I do or say? And I think that's a great question to ask yourself in any situation to help you understand where you lie with your boundaries and your values and who you are at the deepest level. When my stepfather that I haven't seen in many, many years showed up at my mom's door, and he was somebody I wanted to avoid for the rest of my life because he was an abusive alcoholic, and he showed up, and I'm in my 40s seeing this guy, and I felt like a little child when he showed up. When he wanted to come in and my mom didn't want him to come in, it was the first time I had to reach way in and ask myself that question, and this happened very, very fast. I asked myself the question, what would I do or say right now if I had no fear of the consequences? And what came to mind was, I can't let you in, sorry. That was what came to mind. To pull that out of me and actually say it to his face was a whole new level and a big risk, but that's what I'm talking about by taking risks is sometimes, and you have to pick your battles wisely, but I think I was big enough to defend myself if this happened. I knew if I said that, I believed he was going to punch me in the face. I decided to say it anyway. I decided to take the risk because I wanted to make me a priority in my life for the first time, as far as him being the perpetrator of anything, the person that I feared most of my life. I'm finally going to stand up to him, and I did. I did in that moment. I pulled it out. I waited for him to punch me, and he never did. He just shrugged his shoulders and said, okay, and walked away. Everything I had imagined of me standing up to him didn't come true. That's kind of my main point. There's so many things that we imagine that we believe are going to come true, and they don't. We just imagine them, they're going to come true. Maybe something happened in our childhood that was true, and it hurt, and we don't want that to happen again, but most of it doesn't. Most of it doesn't happen. There's a lot more to unpack there, but I think when you're working on your own personal empowerment, your own personal strength, that honoring yourself and standing up for yourself, making you first, being self-compassionate and self-loving, which means having compassion for yourself before anyone else, because then you can give compassion to other people because you are abundant in that compassion. Giving yourself love before everyone else, because when you have love to give. And standing up for yourself and honoring those boundaries and honoring those values so that when you run into life's challenges, you have a strong foundation that you will be making decisions from. If you make these decisions from a place of honoring yourself, you will find that your life goes so much better in the long run. Again, the caveat, pick your battles wisely. Don't do this with somebody that you fear hurting you unless you're ready to face that hurt. There's a lot of people out there that you probably don't want to do this with, and there's a lot of people that maybe you've waited too long to do this with, and maybe it's about time. Because once you do that, you start letting go of all the resentment and all the regret and all the upset and all the anger that you're holding on to for so long. So I believe that's the path to personal empowerment. And of course, there's so many other ways to get there, but that is a few of the primary things that I look at.
Okay, perfect. So I think we're going to wrap up here. And thank you once again. My first podcast interview, Mr. Paul Coliani.
Thank you, Grace.
Yes, thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it. All right, I hope you got a lot from that conversation. Again, if you want to hear Grace's podcast, Cultivate Your Inner Goddess, head over to coachingbygrace.com. Otherwise, I'm glad you joined me today. I hope you share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook provides an evaluation of your relationship based on a 200-point assessment. It is geared toward romantic relationships, but many have used it to determine if family or others in their life are being manipulative or emotionally abusive as well. If you're in a difficult relationship and you would like to pinpoint the unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad, let the workbook help you discover the specific components of bad behavior and put into words what you're experiencing. Get the tools you need to help you reach clarity. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. This show reminds you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant because you are. Thank you again for joining me. We'll talk again soon.